To module number 2, MoR principles. The objectives of this particular module are you will be able to define what a principle is. And there are 8 principles. We're going to explore each of these principles in slightly greater detail. Now, MoR is based on principles. And how is a principle defined? Now, even before we look into the definition of a principle, there are 3 key characteristics of a principle. A principle is universal. In other words, it is something that is applicable across the world. It is self-validating. In other words, it is proven to be of some practical use, and it is empowering. So the 3 key characteristics of a principle are they are universal, they are self-validating, and they're empowering. And what are MoR principles? Principles are informed by corporate governance principles and ISO 31000 standard. Principles are high-level and universally applicable statements. They are the ones that provide supportive guidance to organizations to develop their own policies, process, and strategies to suit their requirements. There are broadly 8 principles in MoR version 3. Principle number 1 is align with objectives. We're going to look into some key messages and the key ideas associated with this particular principle. And then we'll move on to study fits the context, engages stakeholders, provides clear guidance, informs decision-making, facilitates continual improvement, creates a supportive culture, and achieves measurable value. So these are the 8 principles of MoR. So let's kind of study each of these principles in greater detail. So principle number 1 is align with objectives. Now, MoR provides leadership and governance teams to achieve the objectives that are at risk over time. Multiple situations are uncertain, but risk management is concentrated only on the uncertainties which have the potential to affect one or more objectives achievement. In other words, in any organization, there could be multiple risks that could be scattered across the organization. But when we think about a particular risk, we are looking into, is that particular risk something that would jeopardize the objectives of that particular initiative, be it a project or a program? So we need to align risk management to the objectives of that particular project or program. As a result, organizations should understand the objectives that are at risk and define the performance indicators that can be utilized to express the way much risk to each objective is tolerable. Let's say, for example, one of the objectives of the organization is to maintain utmost quality in all of their products and services. So when you think about a risk, you're looking into, well, what would jeopardize the quality of the outputs that we are creating at a project level, for example, and what kind of indicators can we use to make sure that we express that risk in terms of its impact on the objective. So aligning with objectives is a key principle. We've got a few more thoughts on the next slide. Only with this, risk management can allow a suitable balance between enhancing opportunities and decreasing threats. So risk is not only something that would decrease the threats on a project, it is also something that would exploit and enhance opportunities. We've got to look at ways of improving the project or program objectives. Objectives may change as well as risk management. And there has to be a kind of alignment with the changing objectives, and we've got to respond to changes in a way which is controlled, especially post-COVID-19. A lot of the strategic objectives, a lot of the pestle environment, the political, economic, social, technological, legal, and economic environmental landscape is constantly changing. So we need to kind of make sure that risk management is aligned with the changing objectives. A fundamental aspect of risk management is a shared knowledge among stakeholders that risk is dynamic, not static. Therefore, risk management should be a continuous process that expects and is responsive to change in an organization or its broader context to align with objectives. So what is the main outcome? The main outcome of aligning with objectives is to satisfy the needs of the stakeholders. So the main outcome of satisfying the aligning with objectives principle is that the risks that are prioritized for management action are the biggest potential to protect or improve current value. And the following points achieve the principle. Leaders being clear regarding objectives. Well, a very important aspect of risk management is to begin our journey with what the objectives of an initiative are, be it a project or a program. And leaders should be able to clearly articulate those objectives and be able to express the risk appetite to those objectives. Let's say, for example, delivering within a particular timeline, let's say, is objective. Well, if that is the objective, how much of delays is an acceptable delay is something that we need to kind of define. Another point to look into is governance, defining ownership and delegated authority for each and every objective is a key point to look into. The last point is a risk management process is continually applied to reflect changes to objectives with time. So alignment with objectives is a key aspect of risk management. So that's principle number one. Principle number two is risk management should fit the context. So what is the key message? MoR provides guidance on tailoring risk management so that it is proportionate to the objectives at risk over time. The external and internal contexts are critical determinants of the required risk management's extent as well as type. For the organization, the external context involves the sector, locations, markets, technologies, regulatory regimes, and societal expectations that give the backdrop for the performance of the organization. Let's say, for example, if you take a pharma company in perspective, you would need to kind of look into, let's say, the regulatory environment around pharma. In the United States, you have the Food and Drug Administration, which is the regulatory environment. So the amount of risk, effort, and the risk context that we need to examine would, to a large extent, depend upon these factors. And the internal context includes the strategy, formal as well as informal structures, the relationship between stakeholders and the processes and incentives deployed overall or within the organization's part. So you need to kind of examine both external and internal context. They are critical determinants to determine what extent of risk management should kind of be adopted within the organization. A few more ideas. For any organization, the context is dynamic and should be understood for effective risk management. In the external context, changes will introduce new upside as well as downside risk to objectives. By the way, when we talk about upside risk, we're talking about opportunities. When we talk about downside risk, we're talking about threats. So we need to kind of examine both of these elements. What are our strengths? What are our opportunities versus what are our weaknesses and what are our threats? They may also need different stakeholders, new investments in change to be initiated or various risk techniques to be applied. Changes to the internal context may result in changes to roles, responsibilities, ways of working, or performance measures. Think about a situation where an organization is going through a major restructuring. So that kind of introduces a whole baggage of risk. So we need to be cognizant of the internal context too. Risk management can be successful only if it is proportionate to the context and tailored to the areas that pose the most significant risk or where necessary decisions are made. And the main outcome of satisfying the fitting the context principle is that the investment in risk management allows the organization to make effective decisions to remain relevant for the least effort. So this particular principle fits the context is achieved by a risk management process that evaluates the external as well as the internal context explicitly. It is achieved by leadership that is flexible and ready to adjust so that risk management is fit for context. And it is achieved by continuous focus on whether risk management actions as well as activities are designed to add value. So we kind of covered two principles so far. Align with objectives is principle number one. Fits the context is principle number two.